My father's text arrived 3 days before the ceremony. "Don't come to your sister's wedding. The guest list is final." I was standing on the tarmac in dress uniform, holding my approved leave orders, after missing my sister's milestones for 8 years due to military deployments. He claimed the venue was at capacity, but deep down, I knew the real reason. My presence was an embarrassing reminder of a past my stepmother wanted erased. Instead of making a scene, I turned around and headed straight back to base. 3 hours later, my phone exploded. It was my sister, sobbing uncontrollably. "How could you do this to our family?" My dad had just seen a photo, an old, hidden photograph delivered straight to his inbox, that uncovered 30 years of calculated lies, stolen inheritances, and the real reason my mother disappeared. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Major Madison Caldwell. At 34 years old, I've served in the United States Army for over a decade, surviving high-stress deployments and leading soldiers through unimaginable pressure. But nothing prepared me for the systematic coldness of my own family. Ever since my biological mother passed away when I was 12, my father, Richard, made it clear where I stood. Within a year of Mom's passing, he married Patricia, a polished socialite who viewed me not as a daughter, but as a living reminder of a life Richard was supposed to leave behind. Over the years, Patricia quietly erased my mother's presence from our home, pushing me toward military academy boarding schools the moment I was old enough. I accepted it, throwing myself into my career and earning my gold oak leaves. When my younger half-sister Chloe announced her high society engagement, I filed for official leave months in advance, wanting to honor family ties despite our distance. Then came the text. 3 days before the ceremony, as I stood in my dress uniform on the airfield holding approved leave orders, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. "Don't come to your sister's wedding. The guest list is final." He claimed space was limited and Patricia's aristocratic friends needed the seating. Deep down, I knew the truth. My uniform, my mother's eyes, and my refusal to pretend Patricia was my mother made me an inconvenience. I was officially disowned to keep their perfect picture unblemished. I didn't argue or send a pleading reply. In the military, you learn to read the terrain and adapt quickly. I folded my orders, turned on my heel, and boarded the transport back to base. If my presence was going to ruin their picture-perfect weekend, I would gladly give them the silence they wanted. Back in my quarters, the quiet felt heavier than usual. I spent the evening organizing my belongings, eventually pulling out an old wooden keepsake box that had belonged to my mother. It was filled with yellowed letters, vintage trinkets, and a stack of digitized family archives stored on a flash drive. Even after all these years, I still couldn't understand how Richard had turned his back on the woman who built his empire alongside him. Patricia had convinced him that my mother was history best forgotten, and he had willingly complied. I pulled up the digitized files on my laptop. Despite everything, I held no ill will toward Chloe. She was just a kid when Patricia took over, raised in a golden cage of high expectations. Wanting to give her a piece of real family heritage before her big day, I selected a folder containing scanned childhood photographs and old family recipes. I compressed the files and sent them directly to Chloe's email as a quiet wedding gift, wishing her a lifetime of happiness. What I didn't realize was that buried deep within those unsorted digital archives was a single, misfiled image from 1998, a photo that had sat hidden in the dark for nearly 3 decades, waiting for the exact moment to shatter Patricia's carefully constructed empire. 3 hours after I sent that digital package, my phone began vibrating continuously on my desk. It was Chloe. When I answered, there was no greeting, only the sound of hysterical, breathless sobbing that echoed through the receiver. Between gasped breaths, she managed to choke out the words, "How could you do this to our family? How could you ruin everything?" It turned out that Chloe had received my email while sitting at the head table of her exclusive rehearsal dinner. Thinking it was a sweet, nostalgic gesture from her estranged older sister, she had forwarded the digital folder directly to the venue's event coordinator. They plugged the drive into the main projector to display a surprise childhood slideshow on the giant screen surrounding the ballroom, right in front of 80 wealthy guests, including her future in-laws. Everything went smoothly at first. Warm images of Chloe as a toddler filled the room to polite applause. But then, the autoplay system pulled up the misfiled 1998 photograph. The room had gone dead silent. Staring down at the high-definition display was Richard, his face turning an ash-white shade of pale. The photo showed Patricia sitting intimately in a hotel lounge with Marcus Vance, Richard's former chief financial officer and wealthiest business partner. They were laughing, holding hands, and exchanging an envelope. But what made the room gasp was the timestamp clearly stamped in the bottom corner. July 14th, 1998. That was 2 full years before my biological mother passed away, and 6 months before Marcus mysteriously liquidated Richard's primary corporate holding company. In a single second, in front of the town's elite, 30 years of Patricia's devoted wife persona crumbled into dust. Before Richard could even regain his breath, my phone was violently yanked from Chloe's hands. Richard's voice came roaring through the speaker, trembling with a volatile mix of fury, humiliation, and deep-seated confusion. He demanded to know where I had gotten that photo, accusing me of sabotaging his life and orchestrating a malicious smear campaign against Patricia out of sheer bitterness for being uninvited. I kept my voice ice-cold and composed, using the same calculated discipline I relied on in command briefings. I told him to look closer at the image, specifically at the table right in front of Patricia and Marcus. Behind their champagne glasses lay a thick, open manila folder. On the top document, clear as day under the high-resolution scan, was my biological mother's distinctive signature beneath a header titled "Irrevocable Power of Attorney." That document wasn't just proof of an affair. It was the smoking gun of a long-buried crime. In 1998, while my mother was sick in the hospital, Patricia and Marcus had secretly manipulated her assets, executing a fraudulent legal transfer that drained her private multi-million-dollar estate. They used those stolen funds to bail out Marcus's failing investments and secretly finance Patricia's luxury lifestyle, including the very fund that paid for Chloe's lavish wedding venue today. Patricia hadn't just married my father for status. She had systematically targeted our family, robbed my dying mother of her legacy, and then pushed me out of the picture so no one would ever question where her sudden wealth had come from. Richard stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom as the horrifying realization hit him. The woman he had defended for decades was the architect of his family's destruction. The rehearsal dinner dissolved into complete chaos right there in the main ballroom. With my phone still on speaker, Richard turned his towering anger toward Patricia. She tried desperately to maintain her composure, laughing nervously and insisting to the room that the photograph was a crude digital forgery, created by a bitter, jealous stepdaughter who couldn't accept being left off the guest list. She appealed to the wealthy in-laws, begging them not to let an outsider ruin Chloe's special day. But I didn't let her spin the narrative. From my desk on base, I accessed my mother's archived probate files using my official military legal credentials and pulled up the original state notary registry numbers from 1998. I read the filing codes line by line directly over the phone, proving that the fraudulent power of attorney document had been processed through Marcus Vance's shell firm on the exact date shown in the photo. The room listened in stunned silence. The groom's father, a prominent corporate judge, immediately stood up from the head table. He declared that his family would not be associated with fraud, grand larceny, or financial elder abuse, and threatened to call off the entire wedding on the spot unless the truth was laid bare. Patricia began to panic, her polished facade completely crumbling as she screamed at Richard to hang up the phone. But Richard just stood there, staring at her as if seeing her for the very first time. The decades of deception were completely unraveled, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. The wedding was canceled before sunrise. The groom's family withdrew their support, leaving Patricia and Richard standing in the ruins of an empty ballroom. But the social embarrassment was only the beginning of Patricia's nightmare. By morning, the state attorney general's office and forensic accountants, tipped off by my mother's legal representatives, had officially opened a criminal investigation into grand larceny, mail fraud, and forgery. Every financial account Patricia had touched over the last 25 years was frozen by court order, including the high-end boutique accounts she used to finance her lifestyle. The luxury cars, the country club memberships, and even the house were revealed to have been purchased or maintained using funds tied to my mother's stolen estate. Patricia, who had spent decades treating me like an unwelcome ghost, was now facing multiple felony indictments that carried severe federal prison time. Richard was left completely shattered. He realized too late that in his haste to build a new life, he had allowed a master manipulator to rob his first wife, isolate his oldest daughter, and systematically hollow out his entire family legacy. He tried to sell off assets to settle the mounting legal debts, but with every bank account tied up in court proceedings, he was forced to hire defense attorneys using whatever personal credit he had left. The house of cards Patricia had spent 30 years building had finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies, leaving both of them facing absolute financial and moral ruin. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, Richard showed up at the front gates of my base. He looked 10 years older, his spirit completely broken as he begged me for forgiveness, weeping for the decades he'd wasted defending Patricia while shutting me out. He offered to sign over whatever remained of his estate to make amends. I looked at him calmly, wearing the uniform that had given me the structure and dignity he never provided. I told him that while I accepted his apology, I didn't need his money or his late-blooming regret. My mother's stolen trust fund was officially recovered through the courts and redirected to a veterans' housing charity in her honor. I didn't need a seat at their table to know my worth. Today, I continue to serve my country with pride as Major Madison Caldwell, living proof that truth always outlasts deception. What would you do if your family chose lies over blood? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you in the next video.